Imagine a night out with friends, the kind of evening filled with laughter and just the promise of a good time. Now, picture that night taking a terrifying, deadly turn. That's really the story of Christy Giles and Hilda Marcela Cabales Arzola.
Yeah.
Back in November 2021, these two young women went out in Los Angeles and, well, they never came home alive. Instead, they were dropped off at different hospitals by masked men in a car with no license plates. It's a shocking case, deeply unsettling.
It truly is. And, beyond the immediate tragedy, this case really exposes a dark undercurrent of predatory behavior. It forces us to confront these potential dangers that can exist even in what seem like ordinary social settings.
Exactly. And on this deep dive, we're going to try and dissect this harrowing event piece by piece. We'll look at the initial night out, the frantic search that followed, the crucial investigation, and ultimately the trial of David Pierce. He's the man convicted of their murders.
Right. And to give everyone the most complete picture, we've pulled from a whole bunch of sources. There's the full 48 hours episode on YouTube, which is quite detailed.
Yeah, that was a big one.
Plus reports from ABC7 Los Angeles, CBS News, The Hollywood Reporter, The New York Post, and even info directly from the LA County District Attorney's Office, among others.
So our aim here is really to provide a clear and thorough understanding of what happened. We want to highlight the key pieces of evidence that came out and walk you through the legal side of things.
Yeah, distill the most important takeaways and really explore the broader implications of this incredibly sad case.
Okay, so let's start by getting to know Christy and Hilda a little. Christy was 24. She was a model, aspiring actress, married to Jan Silliers, who's an artist, a photographer. By all accounts, just a really vibrant person.
Brought a lot of light, people said.
Yeah. And Hilda was 26, an architect. She actually just moved to LA from Mexico for her dream job. Her family described her as, kind, friendly, really embracing her new life.
Just two young women full of potential, really. Just starting to build their futures. It makes what happened next even more devastating.
Absolutely. So their evening began November 12th, 2021. Supposed to be a fun girls' night.
Yeah.
They started at Soho House, then later went to a warehouse party, some kind of DJ event.
Okay.
We know that a friend who was with them mentioned they used ketamine at the party. That detail does become relevant later.
Right.
Christy's husband, Jan, he was out of town. And around 1 or 2 a.m., she texted him saying she wished he was there. Hilda also texted Christy around then, mentioning there was cocaine at the warehouse party.
So these little bits of communication, they offer this glimpse into what seems like a pretty typical night out, right? Socializing, some recreational drug use maybe, no immediate sign of the tragedy about to unfold.
Not at all. But things took a really sharp turn in the early hours of the next morning. Around 5:30 a.m., Christy texted Hilda, just a wide-eyed emoji and the words, "Let's go."
Oh.
Hilda replied, "I'll call an Uber 10 minutes away." Now, this is critical. These were the last messages either of them ever sent. An Uber did arrive at 5:43 a.m., waited 5 minutes,
And then left empty.
and then drove away. Nobody got in.
Wow. That image of the empty Uber is, yeah, it's quite chilling.
Yeah.
It suggests something stopped them, right? A sudden inability to leave, like their plans were just abruptly cut off.
Exactly. So Chrissy's husband, Jan, he had location sharing enabled on their phones. Good thing, maybe. He woke up later that day, saw her location was at an unfamiliar address, 8641 West Olympic Boulevard.
Oh, man.
His concern obviously starts growing. Then he sees her location shift to an emergency room. And tragically, shortly after that, he gets the call.
Yeah.
Christy had passed away.
Being so far away and seeing this unfold on his phone, that must have been just agonizing for Jan. That sudden jump from a social outing to an ER location is just deeply alarming.
And the horror doesn't stop there. Just 2 hours later, at a different hospital only about 2 miles away, a second woman, Hilda, is dropped off.
By the same people.
By the same two masked individuals. Same black Prius, no license plates. They told the hospital staff they found her passed out on the curb, claimed they were just good Samaritans.
Right, the Good Samaritan story.
Then they left. No ID, no details. Hilda was still alive, but she was on life support.
The fact that it was the same car, same unbelievable story, the masks, it just screams a coordinated effort to hide what really happened. That Good Samaritan explanation rings so false given everything else.
Incredibly suspicious. And Jan, just desperate for answers, he turns to social media. He posts that Olympic Boulevard address.
Smart move.
Almost immediately, he starts getting responses describing someone who lived there as a very unsavory person, David Pierce. People online quickly ID'd him. Some called him a con man, said he pretended to be a Hollywood producer, alleged a history of sexual assault. This quick online ID was crucial early on.
Jan's quick thinking, using social media like that, was such a vital early step. It shows how sometimes these online communities can really help bring leads to light, you know?
Absolutely did. So detectives Jonathan Vanderlee and Calvin Yu took the case, and Jan's info led them right to David Pierce's apartment at 8641 West Olympic Boulevard. And sure enough, parked behind the building,
The Prius.
the black Prius, matched the description perfectly, even down to the distinctive black rims mentioned by witnesses.
Wow. So, remarkably fast, the digital trail and the eyewitness stuff started pointing right at one guy, one location.
Yeah. When the detectives knocked on Pierce's door, the lights inside immediately went out. Took about 15 minutes before Pierce and his roommate, a guy named Brant Osborne, finally came out.
Hiding something.
Seems like it. Pierce initially denied even owning a Prius, which was easily disproven since the detectives could literally see the license plates lying on the ground near the car.
Not a great start for him.
No. Osborne initially claimed he hadn't seen Christy and Hilda at all, but then his story kept changing in later interviews. These inconsistencies were, big red flags early on.
Those immediate denials, the changing stories.
Yeah.
Classic signs in an investigation. Suggest they're trying to hide something from the police.
So inside the apartment, the detectives found 2 stripped beds and a washing machine that had clearly just been used. It was still damp.
Okay, cleanup attempt.
Seems likely. They also found a safe containing some baggies, which the men claimed were for, like, arts and crafts.
Arts and crafts, right.
But here's where a really significant connection comes in. Detective Yu recognized the name David Pierce.
Oh.
From before. Yes. He had previously investigated Pierce back in 2020, a sexual assault reported by a 19-year-old woman. She alleged Pierce gave her drugs to incapacitate her during a date.
And that investigation.
It had stalled. But Detective Yu knew about this potential pattern. There was another rape accusation from 2014, also didn't result in prosecution. Pierce's alleged method: meeting women online or at parties, drugging them, sexually assaulting them.
So, Detective Yu's prior involvement is huge here. It wasn't just recognizing a name. It established this potential pattern of behavior that mirrored what might have happened to Christy and Hilda, suggested this wasn't isolated.
Exactly. And the fact that previous allegations hadn't led to convictions also, sadly, highlights how tough these cases can be to prosecute.
Definitely.
As the investigation moved forward, more evidence started piling up. Surveillance footage from the warehouse party actually showed Christy and Hilda leaving with Pierce, Osborne, and another friend of theirs, Michael Ansbach.
Okay, so all 3 guys were there?
Yep. We also have those texts between Christy and Hilda about the cocaine at the party. But the really damning footage came from Pierce's apartment building, security cameras, about 11 hours after their last text messages.
11 hours.
11 hours. The footage shows Pierce carrying Christy's limp body. Osborne is carrying her bag. That huge delay before seeking any medical help just raises massive questions.
That 11-hour gap is it's incredibly significant. It strongly implies something went very wrong in that apartment. And why wasn't help called immediately? What happened during those hours?
Exactly. And the footage gets even more disturbing. About an hour and a half later, more footage shows the men leaving the apartment again, this time with Hilda.
Oh, God.
Pierce is carrying her. Osborne has her boots and coats.
Oh.
Then, just 30 minutes after that, the black Prius arrives at the second hospital, and the footage catches the 2 men taking Hilda out of the car. The way they transported them, dropping them off separately, it says a lot about their intentions.
Yeah, that deliberate act of separating them, giving false stories at the hospitals, it points to a clear attempt to obstruct any investigation, avoid responsibility.
And adding to this awful picture, a downstairs neighbor testified in court. They heard someone in pain, moaning, intermittently, for about 6 hours. 6 hours, coming from Pierce's apartment during the time the women were there. Despite this, none of the 3 men, Pierce, Osborne, or Ansbach, ever called 911. That testimony just paints a grim picture of neglect, of suffering.
That neighbor's account is particularly chilling. It suggests at least one of the women was alive and clearly in distress for a long time inside that apartment, and yet nobody did anything to get her help, just callous disregard for human life.
Weeks later, Pierce, Osborne, and Ansbach were arrested. Initially, they weren't very cooperative, but eventually Ansbach started talking to the police.
Ah, the 3rd man.
Right. He gave a detailed account. Said Pierce offered what he calls special cocaine. Ansbach said all 3 of them, himself, Christy, and Hilda, got sick almost immediately after using it.
Okay.
He then said he woke up hours later and found Christy unresponsive. And here's a particularly chilling detail. Ansbach testified that when he urged Pierce to take the women to the hospital, Pierce repeatedly said,
What?
"Dead girls don't talk."
Wow. Just wow. Ansbach's testimony is pivotal then. It's a first-hand account from inside, directly implicating Pierce in giving them the drugs and revealing this horrifyingly callous motive for not getting help. Dead girls don't talk. That gives you a terrifying glimpse into Pierce's alleged mindset.
And there's another layer here. The police secretly recorded a conversation between Pierce and Osborne while Ansbach was cooperating.
Okay.
In that recording, Pierce is worried. He's worried about Ansbach telling the police that he, Pierce, gave the women drugs. What's really noteworthy is that the information about fentanyl likely being the cause of death hadn't been publicly released yet.
So Pierce knew.
It suggests Pierce had specific knowledge about the drugs involved, knowledge he shouldn't have had if his story was true, knowledge he hadn't revealed.
That detail about the non-public info on fentanyl is highly significant. Yeah, it strongly suggests Pierce knew what substances were involved before it was public, undermining his denials.
So, the trial of David Pierce starts in January 2025. He's facing felony murder charges. Now, felony murder basically means a death happened while committing another felony.
Right.
In this case, the prosecution argued the underlying felony was the intent to commit rape by incapacitating Christy and Hilda with drugs. Osborne was charged as an accessory after the fact.
So the challenge for the prosecution was proving that intent, right, without the victim's testimony.
Exactly. Which is why establishing Pierce's prior pattern of behavior became so crucial to their case.
Makes sense. In cases like this, where the victims can't speak, showing a pattern with other people becomes essential to demonstrate intent, the defendant's MO.
And this is where the powerful testimony of the 7 Jane Does came in. These women recounted their own eerily similar experiences with Pierce.
Yeah.
They detailed instances where he offered them drinks that made them dizzy, disoriented, followed by sexual assault. One woman, Jackie, identified as Jane Doe #2, testified about being assaulted by Pierce at that same West Olympic Boulevard apartment back in 2010.
Wow, 2010?
Yeah. After drinking something he gave her. She described fighting him off, being thrown down, punched, eventually escaping. She hadn't reported it back then, citing the stigma around sexual violence, but came forward after learning about Christy and Hilda. The collective weight of these testimonies was just substantial.
The courage of those Jane Does coming forward to share such deeply traumatic experiences, it really can't be overstated. Their stories together painted this disturbing picture of Pierce's alleged predatory behavior spanning over a decade. It added huge weight to the prosecution's argument that this wasn't some isolated tragedy, but a continuation of a pattern.
So when it was their turn, both Pierce and Osborne took the stand. Pierce denied everything, denied giving the women drugs, claimed they were just partiers who often passed out what he called his crash pad.
Or crash pad.
Yeah. His explanation for not calling 911, that his place was just a party house, people passing out, was common. He claimed he helped them into bed, went to sleep, and only tried CPR and took them to the hospital because he thought it'd be faster than an ambulance.
That explanation seems highly improbable, given the neighbor hearing moaning for hours, the stripped beds, the whole thing. Trying to normalize it as a party house mishap feels like a weak defense against the evidence.
It does. Osborne's testimony was apparently quite emotional. He claimed he was just an innocent bystander, didn't really grasp what was happening. But Christy's husband, Jan, he just didn't buy it. He pointed to the evidence suggesting Osborne actively helped with the cover-up, like helping move the bodies. Osborne claiming ignorance seems pretty at odds with the footage and the timeline.
Yeah, Osborne's claim of being unaware is really hard to square with the security footage showing him actively participating in moving the women. It definitely raises questions about his level of awareness and his role in what happened afterwards.
In closing arguments, the prosecutor, Mariano, gave a powerful rebuttal. She emphasized that even if the women used drugs recreationally before, it didn't excuse Pierce's alleged actions afterwards.
Right.
She brought up Ansbach's testimony again about Pierce saying, "Dead girls don't talk," hammering that home as his motive. The defense, predictably, argued for reasonable doubt because the women had used drugs themselves.
It's a common defense tactic, focusing on the victim's choices to deflect blame. But the prosecution focusing on Pierce's actions after the overdoses, his alleged motive, and that established pattern, it seems like that ultimately resonated more with the jury.
It did. The jury reached a significant verdict. David Pierce, guilty of first-degree murder for both Christy and Hilda, and guilty on all the sexual assault charges related to the 7 Jane Does.
Wow. Guilty on all counts for Pierce.
Yes. However, the jury was deadlocked on the charges against Brant Osborne, so a mistrial was declared in his case.
Interesting. So accountability for Pierce, but Osborne's situation is left unresolved for now.
Right. The guilty verdicts against Pierce, though, definitely brought some sense of closure and justice for the victims and their families.
Absolutely. Acknowledging the tragedy and the bravery of the Jane Does. The mistrial for Osborne, though, yeah, it leaves a question mark.
We also need to touch on the toxicology reports. Christie's tox screen revealed cocaine, fentanyl, and GHB, the so-called date rape drug in her system.
GHB too, okay.
Yeah. Hilda's toxicology showed cocaine, MDMA, which is ecstasy, and elevated levels of fentanyl. The prosecution argued Pierce supplied the fentanyl-laced drugs. The defense could potentially argue, well, maybe they got fentanyl unknowingly through other recreational use. It's complex with multiple substances.
The fentanyl in both women is obviously critical, and how it got there is central. But detecting GHB in Christie's system really bolsters the prosecution's argument about incapacitation, right? Especially combined with fentanyl, that's a particularly dangerous mix.
Definitely concerning. Throughout this whole thing, the investigation, the trial, several key details really stood out. That timeline built from digital evidence. Texts, phone locations, security footage, absolutely crucial for the prosecution.
Digital forensics are so key these days.
Totally. Michael Ansbach's cooperation, even though he was initially involved, provided that vital first-hand testimony. And again, the immense bravery of those 7 Jane Does coming forward. Their collective testimony was incredibly impactful.
Cannot emphasize that enough.
Pierce himself was described as a con man, a serial rapist, someone who pretended to be a Hollywood producer. And it's also significant, remember, he changed his phone number after Hilda died, making it harder to find him initially.
Right, suggests consciousness of guilt.
And in just a really poignant moment, Christie's mother, Dusty Giles, made this powerful public plea urging people, share your location with family you trust.
Such a stark reminder that convergence of digital evidence, witness accounts, and those prior victim stories built a compelling case against Pierce. Dusty Giles' plea.
Yeah, highlights the need for basic safety measures. So just to recap the outcome, David Pierce found guilty. Murders of Christy Giles and Hilda Marcella Cabales Arzola, plus the sexual assaults of 7 other women. Fentanyl and GHB played a huge role. The jury clearly saw a pattern of predatory behavior. Brant Osborne's case ended in a mistrial. It's just an undeniably tragic loss of 2 vibrant young women. Our hearts really go out to their families and friends.
It's a deeply disturbing case, and it really forces us to think about that complex, tragic intersection of, recreational drug use and outright criminal intent. It also powerfully shows how vital survivor testimony can be in bringing perpetrators of these kinds of awful crimes to justice.
Yeah.
Makes you grapple with what accountability really looks like when there are just so many layers of tragedy and blame.
It's a profound and unsettling question, definitely one that stays with you. We really encourage everyone listening to take a moment, reflect on the importance of awareness, the critical need for better support systems for victims of sexual assault, drug-facilitated crime, and just the ongoing challenges we face in combating this stuff. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.